Annie Sauvageau is a very interesting figure. She's a very polarizing figure. She's got a much higher profile, much more charismatic than your standard chief medical examiner. She's also been a very divisive figure and has a reputation for not working and playing well with others. We saw that during the roundtable into the child welfare system, where she was very resistant to any idea of collaborating with people like the children's advocate to investigate the deaths of children in care. I think she's had a reputation for being quite territorial. I also know, after 20-some years of being a journalist, that anytime you get an HR dispute at the center of a news story, that it's always more complicated than either side narrative would have you believe. That said, the allegations that Sauvageau is making are extraordinarily serious, not just about interference by politicians in the workings of her office, but about the awarding of very lucrative contracts to the funeral cartel, basically. Certainly, the questions that she's raised, I think, demand public scrutiny and answers. In some ways, to me, the issues about butting heads with the Justice Minister, Jonathan Dennis, are less interesting to me than the systemic question of whether or not Albertans are at the mercy of a funeral industry cartel that preys on people when they're at their most vulnerable.
Have you ever heard anything like this, Graham? And how big a problem is this for Premier Jim Prentice and his Justice Minister, Jonathan Dennis?
Yeah, the one analogy I can raise would be with Lorne Gibson. He was the former chief electoral officer in Alberta. He sued the province a few years ago.
Yeah, in very similar circumstances.
For $450,000 because his contract was not renewed by the All-Party Committee, mainly run by the Conservatives, because he had released a report with 100 recommendations pointing out real serious flaws in their system of elections in Alberta. Among them, of course, back then, the provincial cabinet was the one that actually appointed the returning officers in each riding. So the cabinet actually would appoint them. He said, this is not right. So he had these different recommendations and said there's some real problems with our system. He also pointed out illegal contributions, mainly to the PC party. And his contract was not renewed by the All-Party Committee that oversaw that. And he sued for $450,000. And that is still in the courts, I believe, still winding its way through. As for Prentice and Dennis, Prentice is doing what he's done in so many different issues. I wasn't there at the time. You can't blame me. We'll let other people look into it. And that seems to be very effective on his part, just saying, look, it's under new management. That happened under the old system. I'm a new guy. So he's not addressing it directly. Will the issue hurt him? Unlikely. Is it a problem for the government? It's in court now. It's going to be going through court now for years, potentially. It'll be going underground, basically. If this election, it'll make no difference at all.
And so what was the reaction around the legislature to this? Was there much talk about it?
Well, I think the law, and I don't know if I mentioned earlier, she's suing Justice Minister Jonathan Dennis plus 4 sort of senior officials within the Justice Ministry as well. Because of all of the really explosive allegations that are included in the lawsuit, 24 pages long, by the way, and quite detailed, it really fed into this narrative that here in Alberta we have a 43-year-old government that has its tentacles into all different nooks and crannies of the province, and that politics enter into a lot of different things. In one part of the lawsuit where she's talking about her claims that she was, being left out of discussions and there were these negotiations going on, it says in there that she was told that, they needed to appease the Alberta Funeral Services Association and they needed to, appease the rural vote. That sort of thing really feeds into that narrative that the PCs are this dynasty that are incapable of sort of making decisions that don't have these political overtones to them.